So our work is around identifying what archetype describes what you're doing, and then we align that with the specifics of the organization to create their unique story, a story that's unique, compelling, and memorable, that engages the audiences that they need to reach.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hello, and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. My name's Rick Nusky. I'm your host. It's great to be back with you. I always love doing this show because I get the opportunity to spend some time having a bit of a laugh, but also sharing a lot of great content that will help you. It will help your book writing, will help your business, and whatever venture you're in, because I'm speaking to people who have actually walked the road before you. So if you're an entrepreneur who's trying to get somewhere in business, this is the show to be on. Now, my next guest, you're going to love the story that we're going to be talking about, because it's all about stories. And I'd like to welcome to the show Paul Furiga. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's really a pleasure to be on, and I appreciate you having me.
No, look, it's absolutely my pleasure. Now, just for context, I'll tell everybody that we're going to be talking about the art and power of storytelling, and we're going to have a particular focus, Paul, on the what you call the capital S story. So that's very intriguing, and why it's an organization's most valuable marketing asset. But before we do any of that, we need to know about your story. That is the format of the show, Paul. We always take I guess a step left to center away from the business, because I think fundamentally businesses don't change too much, but the people behind them absolutely do. So I'm wondering, where are you calling in from today?
I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the United States.
And that's home?
Yes, indeed, it is home.
Tell us a little bit about it. Has that been your home forever? And what's some landmarks around there that people might know?
Okay, well, Pittsburgh is a sports town, or as a bumper sticker that's popular around here says, Pittsburgh is a drinking town with a sports problem. So depending on where your listeners are, they may know the Pittsburgh Steelers, the football team here, American football,
of course, yes.
Or they may know the Pirates, our baseball team.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a very great hockey team, actually. As we're recording this episode, they're on fire. They're doing amazingly well. And all of those things make this a major league city, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It's the city where my grandparents came from the old Europe and the Great Migration at the beginning of the last century. Myself, I'm a journalist originally by training. I imagine we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And I've lived all over the country and done a lot of different things, which help make me a better storyteller, I hope.
Yeah, wonderful. Absolutely. Loving it. Could you tell us a little bit about those times, those early days growing up? We all have at least one fond memory. You touched base on your grandparents. I'm wondering if there's any fond stories, memory stories that you could bring up for us.
Well, certainly, as I said, my grandparents on both sides of the family were the product of the immigrant experience. So a lot of my youth was filled with Eastern European rituals around major holidays and Christian holidays for sure. The families were Catholic, and it always involved food.
Oh, yeah.
So, pierogies, golumki, all kinds of Eastern European delicacies.
I'm hungry already.
There you go. See, it was a lot of fun. It was a good time, and both of my grandmothers were wonderful ladies, very, very strong of character. I really learned a lot from them, and they were a big part of my formative experience growing up.
You know what? You've touched on a couple of things that I love to talk about, the formative experience and the fact that you're exposed to certain people that in your earlier years helped to form you into the man that you've become today. Who else would have been around at that time? Any other figures?
Well, certainly my dad. The whole concept of being a storyteller. He's past eight years now, but one of the things that I inherited were all of his writings and records, and he was kind of the family archivist. And it's amazing. I have videotapes, audio tapes. I have a memoir of his World War II experiences that was probably 90+% complete when he wrote it. Of course, it was literally written before the internet, Rick. And so
Mm.
he finished the manuscript but continued to collect material. And one of my projects I'm working on now that I got my book done is integrating all of the things that he learned after he kind of air quotes finished the original manuscript into the manuscript, because it's really quite a story. He was a flyer in the Second World War and a prisoner of war, as he used to say, a guest of the Fuhrer,
Huh.
uh, after bailing out of his burning B-17.
Right.
Uh, and that's the taproot right there. My dad was a heck of a storyteller, and I think I inherited those genes for sure.
It's a fascinating but yet dark period of time that I think that we must remember and tell stories about, regardless of how hard it was, don't we? Do you agree with that?
I agree 100%, Rick. I was speaking with a gentleman from the UK a bit earlier today, and I was talking about being involved with the association that commemorates my dad's bomb group. And one of the projects we have underway in the UK is trying to build a museum on his old airfield, which is actually the first airfield where American planes flew to bomb
Oh, wow.
Nazi-held Europe, and also the airfield where the last planes that flew over Nazi Germany took off from. So it's got a bit of a historical significance there, and
Absolutely.
we're working to preserve that.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for sharing. They're obviously valuable stories that mean a lot to you, and certainly the audience would take a lot away from it. Thank you again. Now, on that, we have entrepreneurs, startup business owners, and the likes, and they take a lot from people who are running businesses themselves, because some of them don't know what to do, and others want some more advice along the way. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about your daily work routines. What does it look like for you? Are you an early riser? What's your routine?
Well, Rick, you and I are both dog lovers. I have a dog that gets me up at the crack of dawn, desiring to be fed,
Yeah.
and I also have a cat. Cats, what's that saying? I don't know if you have this in your part of the world. Uh, Dogs have owners and cats have staff. So we also have a cat, and the cat lets the dog do the dirty work to get me up uh, early. I'm actually pretty flexible on my daily schedule. Growing up in the news business, uh, I think you can acquire, and I have suffered from this over the years, I'll call it a deadline-driven psychosis.
Mm.
What that means is, and in the world we live in today, unfortunately, we're all exposed to this on one level or another with everything that's going on in the world and how connected we are.
Yeah.
But that deadline-driven sort of behavior, you lurch from one deadline to the next. What that's done for me is I've learned to wear the world like a loose garment, if you will, and that's allowed me to be very flexible. And really, I think for entrepreneurs,
Mm.
that's a critical skill, to be nimble, to be adaptable, to not let today's setback uh, blow you off course, or today's triumph cause you to hang it up and just rest on your laurels, right? And certainly that's a skill that I learned in journalism, and that has continued today. Our main business is we're an agency, we're a storytelling agency,
Mm-hmm.
a 21st century version of a PR agency, if you will,
Yep.
um, where we uncover, develop, and share our clients' stories.
Yeah.
And
Fantastic.
yeah,
And we'll take a deep dive into WordWrite in a moment, if you don't mind.
yep.
Prior to that, when you get some time to take a break, because I often hear stories about people who don't take a break. They're so driven that they don't think their personal health and recovery and rejuvenation is important. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say if the last 2 years dealing with the global pandemic have taught us anything, it is that it is essential to take that time and focus on yourself. One of the things that I do at the beginning of every day. I'm a daily meditation practice that's critical to me.
Hmm.
It's been very important to help me deal with the stress, particularly the last 2 years. I like to stay active.
Yep.
The dog not only gets me up to feed her, but she demands a walk every day.
You will take me.
Uh, yeah, as well as we speak today in Pittsburgh, we are snow covered, the opposite, of course, of where you're at
Oh, yes.
in the year, and it is well below freezing, and she will still want to be walked.
You still want to go for a walk.
Yeah,
Crazy.
so that keeps me going, and I think diet and exercise are also important. And it really does all start though with attitude, as I said a few minutes
Yeah,
ago.
thank you
It's
very much,
critically
Paul.
important.
I also, when I think about diet, I also think about your mental diet. Now, in
Yes,
terms of when you're burnt out, what do you do? Do you like to read, or do you watch a movie, or you listen to some music? You do a combination of those things?
all of the above. I've also been an amateur musician over the years.
Ah,
Something that most people don't know about me. I actually trained to be a classical musician for a while, and my main instrument was the tuba,
oh,
which I still play every now and then. I'm actually on the board of a brass band here in Pittsburgh. It's the only professional brass band in North America, and yeah, so music, playing music, listening to music. I love film. Like many people during this pandemic, I've been a heavy consumer of Netflix and Amazon Prime and
hmm,
Disney Plus and many others. And there's a lot of great storytelling out there. One of my favorites in the last couple of years was the Disney Plus Mandalorian series.
oh
And
yes, my
now,
friends
now,
absolutely love it.
yeah, now we're on to Boba Fett.
Boba Fett,
So
yeah.
it's
Oh,
all good.
Star Wars is really the epitome of storytelling, isn't it? I wonder, who do you see up there in the top maybe three best stories that you've ever heard? Be it in movie format, book format, or other.
Oh, well, certainly I'd have to put the Star Wars sort of anthology right there at the top.
Hmm.
Uh, One of the reasons for that, and I read about this in the book, is that George Lucas, when he was putting together the idea for the backstory, the journey that he would trace throughout the film, he
Hmm.
worked with somebody that I write about in my book, Joseph Campbell, who was a world-renowned mythologist, to create in film or on film what Campbell described as the hero's journey, which is considered by many to be the most prototypical story archetype that exists. And if you think about Luke Skywalker uh, in the early films, the hero is an outcast in a forgotten place. In Campbell's telling, there's actually 17 steps to the hero's journey, but this outcast is secretly a hero and they don't know it. They meet a magic man. There's Yoda,
Yep.
who gives them some sort of magic power, and then they go on to save um, their civilization and become a great hero. And that's basically the hero's journey in a nutshell. So I have to put that uh, film anthology right at the top. But
Absolutely.
anything Disney's done,
Yeah.
Disney is master. Pixar in particular, a company that was actually started by Steve Jobs and later bought by Disney.
Hmm.
Many folks who are prominent storytellers working with companies or individuals or in popular culture consider Pixar to be a touchstone. There are many tools that the Pixar team uses to create great storytelling moments.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great feedback. Thank you so very much. And we're going to be talking about storytelling at the core of your business, which is very, very exciting because I
Yes.
love the fact that you and your team would do a lot of research just naturally trying to learn about story. Because if we talked about the history of story, we're going back eons in time. So it's going to be very, very interesting to talk about that. Before we do, Paul, I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about your professional background leading up to WordWrite.
Well, for sure. So my parents didn't want me to be a professional tuba player. Apparently, they thought that the musical life was not going to be extremely beneficial financially.
Mm-hmm.
So I showed them I became a journalist, which, as everybody knows, is a very, very fast-growing field with a great future. Of course, being just a little bit sarcastic there.
Yeah.
However, that is excellent training as a storyteller. And I spent 20
Oh.
years in journalism. I did everything. I actually have a degree in broadcast journalism.
Mm-hmm.
I
That
spent
was at Miami.
Miami of Ohio, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent some time on radio and TV here and there, but most of my work was in print. And I worked on trade magazines. I spent a lot of time working for daily newspapers. And I worked for wire service in Washington, D.C., of course, the capital in the U.S. I covered Congress. I covered the White House. I covered presidential campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of great experience. I covered everything from murders to the White House, and over the span of 2 decades. And I figured it out one time because it's important if you're to me, if you're going to say you're a storyteller, how are you credible in that regard? And
Mm.
from the journalistic perspective, I wrote more than 10,000 stories, and as an editor, I easily edited another 10,000. So that's a lot of beginnings, middles, and ends.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not expect to get into the agency business, but back when journalism was healthy, the way you advanced your career was you moved around a lot. I had done that a fair amount. I was in Pittsburgh at the time, and I asked a friend of mine to quietly help me network for something to stay in town. And as a funny story, actually, he ran the largest PR agency in Pittsburgh, and he called me up one day and said he wasn't going to help me. The paper had come out that day, so I started rifling through the paper to figure out what we'd said or done as journalists to upset this man that he wouldn't help me anymore. He had a very wry sense of humor. His name was Larry Werner. And after about 10 seconds, he said, well, aren't you going to ask me why I'm not going to help you? And finally I said, okay, Larry, I give up. Tell me why. And he said, because I want you to come work for me instead.
Oh.
And that led me into a business I did not expect to be in. Most journalists that I've met and worked with over the years don't really like people in the agency business. And that actually relates to storytelling in the sense that most journalists think that people who are in advertising or PR are false prophets, that they're telling false stories.
Mm.
And when I got into the business, it was with a commitment based upon all that journalistic experience that there were a lot of great stories out there that weren't being told about companies. And part of the reason why was because they really didn't understand how to tell their story.
Yeah, that comes out in spades, doesn't it? A lot of times. And, if there's one thing that I always think about with story, it's at the core of everything. It seems to me that different modalities come and go. I don't know what your opinion is of this, Paul, but, television seems to be falling by the wayside. The internet seems to be coming to the fore. The way we consume media is omnipresent, 24 hours a day. We're always switched on, and there's a lot of rubbish out there, if you don't mind me saying, in terms of false stories, because there is that battle. Do you think? And how do you counter it?
Absolutely. And this is right at the core of everything that we do as a firm, and a major reason why I wrote the book.
Hmm.
I frequently say when I speak on this topic that storytelling is the original form of human communication. It's the only form of effective communication that is completely portable, no batteries required, because all you need is a brain and a means to communicate from one brain to another.
Yep.
A big focus of our work and of the book is that storytelling isn't, BS or rubbish. It is biology. And with the advent of tools such as functional magnetic resonance imaging and other brain scanning tools, we can now see that what happens when a great story is shared is that the brain activity of the storyteller and the storyteller's audience sync up.
That's
In other
fascinating,
words,
isn't it?
it's as if they're dancing together
Yeah.
and partners, and the storyteller is leading and the audience is right with them, moving around the floor, sharing the experience. This is
Does
critical.
does that seem to explain why when we're seeing in a Star Wars movie that we don't know where we are all of a sudden?
Absolutely.
We're in the moment.
Absolutely. There is this a suspension of disbelief that happens when you're inside a great book or a
Mm-hmm.
play or a film or even an example I often use is, even before television, we had this thing called radio.
Oh yeah.
And most of the early successful television shows, dramas,
Mm-hmm.
were radio dramas that had been translated to television.
Hey, can I add one?
Sure.
War of the World.
Uh, Love it. 1938,
Yeah.
Orson Welles, a seminal bit of culture there. And again, suspension of disbelief. Now, today, some people might brand some of the things quite legitimately as fake news that occurred during the broadcast because people uh, they were confused and thought that what they were hearing on the
It
radio
was
was real.
real. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
But
Oh, go ahead.
the point there is really, though, that you don't need to have a television screen or a smartphone screen in front of you for
Mm.
your brain to take in a story and become part of the story. And in the 21st century, Rick, that's why storytelling is so crucial,
Mm.
because there's been research done that shows that we make sense of everything that happens to us through narrative. And if I may, I'll give you just a quick example.
Yes, absolutely.
There was a research study done a few years ago, the focus of which was, can our brains handle all this information that's coming at us through social media and all these other inputs? So what the researchers did is they wired up people's brains and they took that creative side of the brain, which they thought that wasn't that important. And that was the control side of the brain, because what they were worried about was the analytical side of our brains, the hemisphere that processes information. So what they found was quite surprising. They wired up hundreds of subjects and they subjected them to all kinds of overwhelming information. And in every case, inside the cranium of every person, they saw the same pattern emerge. Overwhelming information comes in, the logical side of the brain can't handle it. The brains of these subjects sent that information to the creative storytelling side of the brain, and then back to the analytical side of the brain. And then people were able to understand.
Wow.
Everything that the subjects were experiencing when they spoke to the scientists conducting the experiment was relayed back to them in the form of stories.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? You can't deny the science, can you? Left brain, right brain hemisphere.
Exactly.
We're alive and ticking, that's for sure. And
That's
certain.
right.
And now,
And
I
yeah.
wonder, Paul, where was the genesis of your wonderful book? And tell us a little bit about it.
Oh, well, thank you. So the book takes its genesis from the work that we've been doing with clients. I'm not a contrarian, but a lot of times people who come up with ideas find themselves up against the conventional wisdom. And we've developed a trademark process called story crafting, in which we uncover, develop, and then share what we call your capital S story.
Yes.
And again, back to journalism, in the old days when people read these things called newspapers, I would often say that today's story is tomorrow's birdcage liner. Well, that's not the way people consume news anymore. They're swiping on Twitter or whatever else they're doing. But the point is the same. We're storytelling creatures, but most of the stories that we tell all day long are important in the moment and then forgotten. But your capital S story answers these critical questions: why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. And if you're an entrepreneur or a leader in an organization, that is the most critical story you need to share. It's the one that describes the very character and nature of your organization. And so our work has been focused on helping organizations uncover, develop, and share that story by using the science and the cultural amalgamation of work from Campbell and Carl Jung and many others, because our brains are not only hardwired for stories, we tell the same stories over and over again. Campbell in The Hero's Journey, one of the reasons he wrote that book and developed that theory is because his study of world religions led him to this amazing conclusion. Regardless of time, economic attainment, culture, language spoken, human beings around the world, we tell the same stories over and over again. So our work is around identifying from the 12 most common archetypal story families, of which there are hundreds of subsidiary archetypes. For your company, what archetype describes what you're doing, and then we align that with the specifics of the organization to create their unique story, a story that's unique, compelling, and memorable, that engages the audiences that they need to reach. If they're a nonprofit, it might be donors or volunteers. Obviously, if it's a for-profit company, they're looking for clients or customers. And certainly every organization today is looking for talent. So that's your capital S story is critically important to attracting the right kind of people who want to be on your team.
So is this a book that's designed for business owners, or who is your audience here?
Absolutely. The book is designed for business owners, business leaders, really. Most of the business leaders that I've worked with over the years, nearly all, frankly, have this immense passion for what they do.
Yeah.
It's what gets them up every day. It's what causes them to go back to work every day. They are on a mission to do something really amazing. Unfortunately, a lot of times they're not able to convey that passion in a way that gets people that they need to have on their team, customers, staff, whatever, who may not share their same personality, may not have the same skills, may not understand their solution or their product at the same level of depth, right? So that's where the story comes in, right?
Absolutely. I wonder, did you find it challenging to write this book, or was it or did it flow?
Well, it flowed and it was challenging. As a writer by training, we have this saying in the States that, our own company, we're like the shoemaker's kids, which is to say that the shoemaker is busy making shoes for everybody else and their own family goes wanting. So our firm's been in business for 20 years, and it took me about 6 years to write the book around serving clients and growing the firm. When I had the time to sit down and do the writing, it was quite enjoyable. And
I must get my hands on this book. I love storytelling. I'm certainly going to reach out and get myself a copy. Now, if we move our focus over, Paul, to WordWrite,
yes,
tell us a little bit about the services that you have there. I know, for example, right now, given the nature of the world we live in, the pandemic that we're living through, there's lots of stories going out there, and I see one of them there is crisis communication. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, absolutely. Well, our firm does a lot of crisis communication work, and I'll be speaking next week at a university here on this very topic. Your story is no more important than when you're in a crisis. I said earlier that your capital S story describes the very character and nature of your organization. And if you as an organization have not done a good job communicating that story before you're in a crisis, the way social media and the internet works these days, you're going to suffer immensely. We talk at our firm frequently that, you need to share your story. You're putting deposits in what we call the Bank of Goodwill, right? And the Bank of Goodwill is the impression in the audiences that you need to reach, investors, customers, employees, that leaves them with a good feeling about who you are and understanding that they know what you do. So that when something unusual happens, people may be shocked, they may be surprised, but the next thing they're going to think is, what do I know about this company? How do I feel about this company? This is a bad thing that either happened to them or that they did. How am I going to evaluate that? And if you haven't shared your story, they have less information to go on. A quick story on that. A few years ago, we worked with a very large company. When I first met with them, they were proud that they didn't really have much of an internet presence. Construction company. And then they set a major bridge on fire. in a downtown of a city. What do you think the first 50 results on the Google search results were after that?
Yeah,
They went from having no presence to having 100% bad presence because they never bothered to share their story. It took them a couple years to dig out from that.
Yeah, wow. And you can see the power of story coming through here. There are, in actual fact, given that we're at the pointy end of the call, Paul, there are at least 6 other categories that we could talk about. But what I would invite people to do is certainly reach out to Paul and your team after this. And if we could momentarily, Paul, is introduce your team.
Absolutely. So we have a core team of really great people. It's my firm, so my spouse, Brenda, actually works in the firm. She handles our finances and HR. A partner, a great guy called Jeremy Church, and he's been with us for 10 years. And like me, Jeremy is a former journalist, and so we bring that to the team. Our director of content, Dan Stefano, is also a former journalist, and Dan is a critical member of the team when we're working on our capital S story crafting process with our clients. We also have great leaders who manage our client relationships. Erin Hogan has been with us for 6 years. She's our director of client services. And, social media, which we talked about a little bit, electronic and digital communication is critical. And we have a great lady named Kira Koskum, who is our digital and inbound marketing director. And she's really fantastic at helping people get their stories out there and all the environments that people turn to these days. And then we have great people on the team who are content creators and digital specialists. We have a young man named Trey Adams. He had a call yesterday with someone at TikTok. So, I mean, we have a client that needs to be on TikTok to tell their story.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for sharing. This has been absolutely a wonderful call. I wonder, given that storytelling is global, universal, if you like, where is your audience located? Where are your clients generally?
Generally, our clients are in North America. One of the things that the pandemic has changed for us, really, Rick, is that we're beginning to look now beyond, and I started talking. I mentioned I spoke with somebody earlier today in Europe, and so really it's global. As you mentioned, storytelling is a global phenomenon. The pandemic, there's a lot of things that cause people pause. In our specific case, one of the good things is if you don't have to be there in person anymore, and you do the kind of work we do, then you can do it for anybody in the world, really.
Yeah, that's great news for anybody who's on the show today or looking for some help becoming a better storyteller. Now, if somebody does want to reach out to you, Paul, where are they going to find you?
I'm going to give you 2 URLs. One is www.capitalsstory.com. If you go there, that'll take you to a landing page on our website, and you'll be able to learn all about the book and our process. The agency's address on the internet is word, like you speak, write, like what you do with a pen, pr.com, wordwritepr.com.
That's too easy to remember. I'll be making sure to put those links on the post. If you are listening into this call, you want some help to become better at storytelling, and we can all learn a little bit more. There's certainly a lot to learn that we've not spoken about today. I know that's for sure and certain. Paul and his team at WordWrite are certainly people you need to make contact with, and we'll go from there. When you're on the path to starting to tell stories, make sure you go to wordwritepr.com. Again, I'll make those links available to you if you're interested. Paul, what a wonderful call. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so very much for joining me on the My Future Business show today.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's been a pleasure to be on with you today.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.